December 6, 1941. Lieutenant Zenji Abe stood on the icy deck of the aircraft carrier Akagi in Hitokapu Bay off the Kuril Islands. He watched his breath turn into wisps of vapor in the frigid air. In his pocket lay a farewell letter to his wife and a lock of his hair, prepared for his funeral should he not return. That morning he had penned those final words, "If I do not come back, know that I fulfilled my duty with honor." Yet lurking at the edge of his thoughts was an unspoken doubt. Are the Americans as vulnerable as our commanders suggested? 24 hours later, this question would be answered in a manner both shocking and brutal. The reality faced by Japanese pilots after their raid on Pearl Harbor transcended mere destruction of vessels and aircraft. It revealed something far more alarming. They had not crippled an ailing power, but awakened a manufacturing giant capable of overwhelming them with an unprecedented rate of production in steel, planes, and ships. This narrative recounts the events of Pearl Harbor from Japan's viewpoint, a tale devoid of military triumph, instead highlighting the gradual and horrifying realization that they had provoked an adversary whose industrial might was not just superior, but virtually incomprehensible. The road to Pearl Harbor was driven by desperation rather than confidence. In July 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt froze all Japanese assets in America and initiated a complete oil embargo. Britain and the Dutch East Indies swiftly followed suit. With this single act, Japan lost access to nearly 80% of its petroleum supply. The empire's oil reserves, accumulated over many years, could sustain them for around 18 months at best. In the event of war, however, this time frame would drastically shrink to less than a year. Admiral Yamamoto, who served as commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, had a clearer understanding of the situation compared to his colleagues who were unwilling to accept it. He stated that merely seizing Guam, the Philippines, Hawaii, or even San Francisco would be insufficient for ensuring victory. To secure an unequivocal triumph, Japan would need to invade Washington and dictate peace terms from the White House. Yamamoto questioned whether politicians were fully aware of the outcome and prepared to make the necessary sacrifices. Despite recognizing the impossibility of this scenario, Yamamoto remained loyal to his nation. When war was declared, he dedicated himself to planning the attack. His strategy was straightforward: launch a surprise assault on the American Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor using an overwhelming force of aircraft carriers. The plan aimed to sink battleships and destroy grounded aircraft in one swift blow. He hoped that within 6 months or perhaps a year, Japan could capture the oil fields of the Dutch East Indies, Malayan rubber resources, and other essential supplies needed for survival. From this position of strength, Yamamoto believed negotiations with America would be more favorable before its industrial might could fully mobilize. This was essentially a high-stakes gamble based on calculated risks. Like most gamblers, however, he ultimately faced defeat. The First Air Fleet set sail from Hitokapu Bay on November 26, 1941, comprising 6 aircraft carriers: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hairu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku, a naval force consisting of 2 battleships, 3 cruisers, 9 destroyers, 7 fuel tankers, and 3 submarines embarked on a mission with 409 aircraft aboard their carriers, carrying some of the world's best naval aviators. Maintaining strict radio silence, they navigated across the North Pacific Ocean over a distance of 3 times 55 tended miles. The northern route was deliberately selected due to its infrequent use in harsh winter conditions, reducing the likelihood of detection by American reconnaissance planes. By December 7, 1941, at dawn, the fleet had positioned itself approximately 230 miles north of Oahu. Commander Mitsuo Fushida led the first wave comprising 18-3 aircraft as they took off from the carrier Akagi's deck. For months, these pilots had honed their skills over Kagoshima Bay, a location similar to Pearl Harbor, necessitating low-altitude precision maneuvers, with steep mountains leading down to a shallow harbor, necessitating low-altitude precision maneuvers, which torpedo bombers trained by releasing their payloads just 10 to 20 meters above the water surface. The torpedoes were modified to run at shallower depths of 10 meters beneath the waterline rather than deeper settings that would have struck the harbor bottom. One pilot, Koname Harada from carrier Soryu, had sent his pregnant wife back to her family home in Nagano when training intensified in September. At 0740 Hawaiian time, Fuchida's formation spotted the sprawling installations of Pearl Harbor below them. The harbor was bustling with naval vessels, including 8 battleships moored along Battleship Row. The fleet was docked as predicted by intelligence reports. However, there was a critical discrepancy. The 3 American aircraft carriers, Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga, were absent from the scene. They were out at sea. Their whereabouts remain undisclosed. Fuka quickly made up his mind. He slid back the canopy of his Nakajima B5N2 and launched a solitary dark blue flare, the signal that his pilots had meticulously trained to identify for months. Then he radioed 3 words that would resonate through history. All, Torah, Torah. Complete surprise was to be achieved. It was accomplished. The attack spanned 1 hour and 15 minutes over 2 waves. A total of 243 Americans perished, while another 178 were injured. 2 battleships, Arizona and Oklahoma, were irreparably damaged and never returned to service. 4 more battleships, West Virginia, California, Nevada, and Tennessee, sustained severe damage but were eventually salvaged and repaired. A total of 18 aircraft were destroyed on the ground. The Japanese suffered losses as well. They lost 29 planes, 5 midget submarines, and 64 men. By any traditional military standard, it was an astounding victory. However, as the Japanese pilots circled above the smoldering harbor, preparing to return to their carriers, some noticed details that would later haunt them. The massive oil storage tanks along the shore, containing millions of gallons of fuel, remained untouched. Lieutenant Zenji Abe participated in the second wave, flying an Ike D-3A dive bomber. When his formation reached Pearl Harbor, they found the Arizona already engulfed in flames, its forward magazines having exploded due to a bomb from the first wave, claiming 1777 lives in a devastating blast. Abe concentrated on ships that were still operational and contributed to their ongoing destruction. The doubts that had plagued him earlier aboard the Akagi remained unresolved amidst the chaos below. On board the Akagi, Commander Fuida pressed Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagamo to launch a third wave aimed at destroying fuel depots and repair facilities. However, Nagamo declined. The primary goal of the initial attack had been accomplished. However, the element of surprise was now lost, with American forces fully alerted to the Japanese presence. It became imperative for the carriers to disengage before they were discovered by their American counterparts. Although Japan had inflicted damage on numerous ships and aircraft, these could be repaired or replaced over time. The real failure lay in not destroying infrastructure, which allowed Pearl Harbor to remain operational as a critical base for the entire Pacific Fleet throughout World War II. As the Japanese fleet retreated towards home waters, pilots began to reflect on what they had seen. A successful sinking of battleships, but a missed opportunity to cripple American naval capabilities permanently. Indeed, they managed to catch their adversaries off guard. If this single American base possessed such resources, how many others could exist? This query would be answered with stark clarity in the ensuing months. In 1941, Japan produced a total of 5,088 aircraft, while the United States manufactured 1943-30, almost 4 times as many. Initially, Japan had entered the conflict with 10 carriers. However, post-Midway, it never operated more than 6 simultaneously again. As time progressed, the disparity in production figures became increasingly alarming. By 1943, American factories were churning out roughly 8,000 to 9,000 aircraft each month, while Japanese annual output reached only around 16,000. The United States managed to produce more planes within 2 months than Japan did in a full year. The construction of the Liberty ship SS Robert E. Peary serves as another testament to American industrial might. Launched at midnight on November 8, 1942, it was ready for launch by November 12, a mere 4 days later. Although this particular instance was a publicity stunt, with typical production taking between 42 and 50 days. The average output from U.S. shipyards improved significantly to 3 Liberty ships completed every 2 days by 1943. During the first 4 months of that year alone, American yards launched more merchant tonnage than Japan had built in 7 years of pre-war preparations. The aircraft production deficit was equally calamitous. In 1944, the United States manufactured an astounding 96 main D-6 planes. At the Willow Run facility in Michigan, run by Ford Motor Company, B-24 Liberator bombers were produced at a pace of 1 every 63 minutes around the clock. Each bomber consisted of approximately 153 minutes around the clock. American workers assembled these aircraft more swiftly than Japanese factories could produce fighter planes to counter them. By late 1943, Japanese pilots encountered an unprecedented challenge that their training had not adequately prepared them for. American forces operating with seemingly inexhaustible resources. During the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, Task Force 58 assembled a formidable fleet of 15 aircraft carriers and nearly 900 planes, launching strikes that Japanese defenses were unable to withstand. The Japanese aircraft, often piloted by hastily trained replacements following severe losses at Midway and subsequent engagements, were decimated in what American pilots grimly dubbed the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japan suffered between 350 and 600 aircraft losses along with 2 carriers. Industrial base rendered Japanese resistance mathematically untenable for those Japanese pilots devastated. After Midway, Japanese pilots wrote home in increasing despair, questioning where all these American aircraft were coming from and expressing frustration that shooting them down only led to more appearing in the sky. They described it as industrial annihilation. By 1945, Japan's situation had become utterly hopeless. Oil supplies captured in the Dutch East Indies could no longer reach Japanese refineries due to the relentless attacks by American submarines, which were produced at a rate that Japanese shipyards could not match. Hundreds of oil tankers lay wrecked on the ocean floor as a result. Japan's once formidable navy, which was among the largest in the world, had shrunk to mere harbor defense duties. The highly trained pilots from Kagoshima Bay, who achieved a surprising victory at Pearl Harbor, were mostly gone, replaced by inexperienced young recruits with only months of training instead of years. Some were sent on suicide missions known as kamikaze attacks, an acknowledgement that conventional naval aviation could no longer compete effectively. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 seemed almost unnecessary given the extent of Japan's devastation. Its industrial capacity was crippled, cities were in ruins from firebombing raids, its navy had been annihilated, and its air force relied heavily on suicidal tactics. The empire that initiated the attack on Pearl Harbor, with the expectation of securing a rapid series of victories leading to a negotiated peace, found itself facing the full mobilization of an industrial giant it vastly underestimated. During World War II, America produced 297,000 aircraft, 19,300 artillery pieces, 86,000 tanks, and 2 million army trucks. Japan's total war production across all sectors was less than 10% of American output in most cases, and often under 5%. Admiral Yamamoto had predicted this outcome with tragic accuracy when he said the attack would lead to certain defeat after 6 months. Yamamoto perished on April 18, 1943, during an ambush by American fighters guided by intercepted and decoded messages from the JN-25V code, revealing his inspection tour plans. He never witnessed the full extent of the disaster he had set in motion with Pearl Harbor. However, he was well aware that American factories possessed a production capacity far beyond Japan's capabilities. His strategy hinged on the belief that Japanese skill and resolve could overcome industrial superiority, but this was ultimately proven false. Surviving Japanese pilots from the Pearl Harbor attack, including Lieutenant Zenji Abe, would spend years reflecting on their experiences in a war they had hoped to win quickly with a single strike. The assault on Pearl Harbor was tactically brilliant, yet strategically disastrous, because it awakened an industrial powerhouse whose scale of production was unimaginable at the time. The oil embargo that drove Japan into war aimed to curb its expansionist ambitions. This event sparked a conflict that exposed the true hierarchy of global industrial might. Japan, which had modernized within just 50 years to become a regional power, dared to challenge a nation with 17 times its gross national income, 5 times its steel production capacity, and twice its population. The outcome was inevitable once American industry fully engaged. American manufacturing prowess achieved what Yamamoto had dreaded the most: dominance not through superior strategy or tactical brilliance alone, but through sheer, relentless production. American factories churned out ships faster than they could be sunk, while aircraft were produced at a rate surpassing their destruction in battle. The scale and efficiency of American shipyards, aircraft plants, tank factories, and supply chains rendered Japanese resistance increasingly futile over time. By August 15, 1945, when Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender, the nation that had launched the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 was thoroughly defeated, not by American resolve alone, but by its unparalleled industrial capacity, which far outpaced what Japan could ever hope to match. The pilots who initiated the raid at Pearl Harbor had inadvertently unleashed a colossus of industry and technology, which ultimately overwhelmed them.